let's take the character of Hornet from Silksong and make her 3D. Hey guys, Jerbederb here. So if you've already seen the short for this, which should be available on my channel, you've already seen the basic gist. I wanted to take the opportunity to make a longer video so I could walk through a little bit more of the process of what specifically that I'm doing. So as you can see right here, I'm building out the block out for the character, just trying to get the basic shapes out. And with her being as skinny and lanky as she is, some areas are a little bit harder to work on. You probably noticed that I switched out her limbs. Basically, the reason why I did that is because I want them to be perfectly symmetrical and not have any lines or bumps in them. So what I just decided to do is use primitive shapes. And then from there, I would just combine everything after the fact. And then when I went into retopology, I would fix that up in the way that I needed it to be done. Her head was relatively simple. I just took a basic shape and then just sculpted up the horns, and then used a boolean to get rid of the, or put in the eye sockets. And as you can see me doing right here, basically I'm taking the sculpt that I had and retopologizing. As I mentioned in the short, I decided halfway through that rather than just having a sculpt of the character, I kind of wanted to push this one in particular a little bit further by making the entire character model. So this is me working through that process. So rather than having a sculpt that's maybe like 100,000 tries or 200,000 tries, I think this one ends up being a little less than 10,000, which is pretty good all things considered, considering that is the head, the body, the cloak, and the sword. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. Here you see me making a few adjustments just because there are a few lumpier edges. I'm not necessarily sure why, but we got it taken care of all the same. And now I'm working on the body, trying to keep everything relatively simple, but at the same time trying to keep in mind how the character is going to deform. So that way they can deform perfectly fine. There's not going to be any stretching, any issues. Granted, most of her body is black and you're not going to be able to see much of the contortions that are happening in the limbs. Didn't necessarily matter to me. I still wanted to try to keep a solid figure in mind. I think it turned out perfectly fine. I think at most it maybe added 100 or 200 tries. Not a big deal whatsoever. So here I'm finishing with that. So at this point, I'm about to get started on the cape, which was definitely the hardest aspect, not necessarily from a modeling perspective, because obviously it's going to be laid on a flat surface. But then when it comes to the rigging part, that's definitely the hardest. As you can see right here, like most of the rig for the character is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Like enough for the limbs, like the arms and the legs, although I do dial it back. I did originally want to have bendy bones for the character, but then I realized that might be a little bit more than what I'm interested in doing for this, so I thought it might be easier just to have the bottom bone kind of serve as the foot, and then have two bones that serve as the legs. And eventually you will see me add an additional bone in between those two, just so that way the leg deforms a little bit better. Same with the arms. Here's me setting up the IK. There was a issue that I was having that I wasn't necessarily sure what the problem was coming from, so you see me opening another project to kind of figure out what might specifically be going on. I discover it's because I don't have a bend in the IKs. So you see me kind of working on that just to make sure that it's properly working. And as soon as we get the bend in there, it works perfectly fine. As I was mentioning earlier, you're seeing me working on the cloak. Obviously, with the fact that the cloak flows and has a lot of movement to it, there had to be a lot of bones to be implemented. Animating this normally would be a nightmare. And even trying to get the pose later in the end, you'll see me do it like over probably 2 or 3 times just because of how much of an issue it is. So what I did was I ended up adding IKs to each of the individual bone segments so that way I could adjust them. And then afterwards I set up control bones from there that I could use to adjust one of every 2. So basically I could have those alternating, and it actually proved to be a really strong result. So here you see me setting up the IK for that right now. and then there's the master controls, and there's the test. Obviously there's some weight painting issues. I actually didn't have to focus on the weight painting for this very much. I was fortunate enough that a lot of the weight painting that was done kind of worked seamlessly and perfectly for the character, save for a few spots which we end up polishing either here in the cape or specifically in the legs or in the shoulders and clavicles. That was areas that we kind of had issues with. But outside of that, everything else worked perfectly fine. So basically, once we get a satisfactory point to this, speaking of point, I start working on the sword, which isn't a very hard shape, but I kind of wanted to make sure that it was all one entire shape. I'm not 100% sure whether or not I modeled it correctly, because I've seen several references where the sword itself is not less pointed and it looks more like a lance. I'm going to be honest, I kind of prefer the way this one looks, so I just went ahead with this. I don't think very many people will be upset with this because I think it looks good. But yeah, so here I'm setting up a prop socket so that way it can be controlled by a specific hand. I think I may have messed up which hand it goes to, but I mean, it's an easy fix. But I think Hornet within the game is left-handed, whereas I set it up for her right hand because obviously most characters and most people are going to be right-handed. But it's a super easy fix, so if I choose to do something with this in the future, that can be something that is just a matter of switching parent bones. So here you see me working on the texture. There's not a lot going on here. Obviously it's very simple shapes and colors just for the sake of readability in 2D. And obviously that translates into 3D, like there's not a lot going on, so I give it like a little bit more. I put some metallic on the, I think it would be referred to as a shell. I want to call it a skull, I'm not sure why. Just to give it a little bit more depth and intrigue. I think it looks a lot better that way. I made sure to have the roughness for her eyes and the specular for her eyes all the way up for the roughness and all the way down for the specular, just so it looks pitch black. It doesn't have the same consistency as like her body, which has you can see a lot more of the light shining off of it. And then her sword is pretty much just like a very dull blue-gray metal color. So here I'm setting up the pose. I was running into an issue with the cape that was giving me a lot of problems, like I was mentioning before, where I couldn't get it to display that back leg. And what I figured out that I could do, I don't know why I'd never considered it before, but basically what I came to the conclusion of is that if I scaled those specific segments down, that I could actually give the illusion that that piece of the cloak is coming over the leg, which worked pretty well. Obviously, it's not one-to-one for the reference, which I wasn't necessarily shooting for. I just kind of wanted to look as much as possible like it, and I think I did a pretty good job with this. So now we're getting closer to the final result. I'm just trying to polish it up and make sure everything looks good. You're gonna see me like testing a lot of the weight painting just to make sure that everything deforms correctly. There was a lot of issues. I wouldn't say a lot of issues, but there were some issues I was having with the knees. I went ahead and just fixed that. And now we're working on the final touches. So basically I grabbed a curve and I started shaping it up similar to the render image. But I wanted to give it a little bit more 3D space. I probably could have done a little bit more with it, but it was already pretty far out, so I didn't want to go too much further with it. But with this, that concludes the entire piece, and this is the final result. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.